Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no. 15
Amateur Traveler, episode 483. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about crowded cities, national parks, and climbing the mountain of death as we go to Cameroon.
I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. No sponsor for today's episode, but I would remind you to join the mailing list so you can find out when we open up that trip to Cambodia for next spring. But now, let's talk about Cameroon. I'd like to welcome back to the show Francis Tapon from The Unseen Africa. And Francis is joined this time by Rejoice Mubarak. So Francis and Rejoice, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are having you on today to talk about Cameroon. And Francis, you spent how much time there?
Almost 4 months.
But Rejoice, you've spent a longer time in Cameroon.
Yeah, I was born here.
Okay. And which is one of the reasons why Rejoice is joining us on this show is that she brings a depth of knowledge, and especially about the northern region where she was born. And before we go on too much further, we should say that you two met in Cameroon.
That's right.
And that Francis also tried to shuffle off this mortal coil in Cameroon, but that's a whole different story that we'll get into a little later. Why should someone go to Cameroon?
Well, I think it's because it's been described, and I think rightfully so, as a mini Africa. And so it has a lot of elements that you will find all over Africa in one country the size of California. And that, I think, is the number one reason you want to go. It's got, on the one hand, the deserts that you find in the Sahara. So we'll get to that. I guess Rejoice can talk a little bit more about that. She comes from the extreme north near Chad. And so that's a very desert-like portion there. It's very Muslim as well. And then you have also the tallest mountain in the region. It's 4,000 meters, which is about 13,500 feet or so. It's a very tall mountain, and it sometimes even gets snow at the top there occasionally. And it also has the sea. and it has a Christian culture and a French culture and an English culture all rolled up into one. There's a part, Cameroon, if you go into history, they actually had a section of it that was controlled by the British, and then another section that was controlled, most of it was controlled by the French. And so as a result, today, the southwest part of Cameroon is Anglophone, and the rest of Cameroon is French speaking.
I didn't know that. I only think of Cameroon as being French speaking. I did not realize that.
Yeah, and it's actually remarkable that Rejoice speaks English actually almost better than she speaks French because she comes from a Francophone part. But Rejoice, maybe you can explain why you speak some English much better than most Francophones.
I went to English speaking school, and I also stayed for sometimes in Nigeria, in the northern part of Nigeria, where the Boko Haram started.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Maiduguri.
Yeah, that's actually like the epicenter of Boko Haram. That's in the north. It's a northeast corner of Nigeria, and that's where she actually went to
Nigeria.
Well, and
school.
And we should say, I'm not sure that everybody is aware of that name, although if you're following the world news, you are. But that is not an area that I would go right now, actually, because the Boko Haram are. I get in trouble for how I describe them. Is why I pause here for a second.
Just jerks.
So what I want to say is Muslim extremists, and I know that my Muslim guide in Morocco, I'm picturing him as I say that I shouldn't even call them Muslims, is what he tells me, because he doesn't consider that what they're doing to be even part of that. But that's how they would be known in the U.S., certainly.
Rejoice, what do you think people from your village and from your town in Marwa, which is in the extreme north, what do they consider Boko Haram people Muslims or not?
No, they don't consider them as Muslims.
Okay.
Yeah, they said Boko Haram don't have religion.
Interesting.
Yeah, but anyway, when they kill people, they say Allahu Akbar, which is in the name of Allah. Mm-hmm. So it's confusing.
Well, and we're not talking about going to there for now. We're talking about going to Cameroon instead.
Yeah, so succinctly summarized is basically what I love about Cameroon is that you have all these different type of ecosystems. You've got a bit of the jungle, you've got dry savanna, you've got the desert, you have the coast, and it's all, like I said, about the size of California. And you have the different cultures, the Francophone, the Anglophone, you have the different religions. In the extreme north, you have the Muslims, you have the extremes, the rest of the country is mostly Christian. You've got that transition zone where you got 50-50 Christian, Muslim. And then, of course, you have the variety of food that you can imagine that comes with all that stuff. So, and it's relatively safe overall as a country. The only place that's currently here in the middle of 2000, or we're coming into the second half of 2015, still the extreme north, where actually Rejoice is from, is still a red zone and i.e. heavily discouraged. But the rest of the country is quite safe. And I spent 4 months there, and I can validate that.
And so the one region you didn't go to, as I understood, was where Rejoice is from.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, and what kind of itinerary would you recommend for Cameroon?
Okay, most people are going to fly into the country because otherwise you have to somehow we drove through Nigeria.
Well, and you're on a little slower pace trip. You're just trying to see all of Africa, every single African country, of which there are, I want to say 52. How close am I?
54. You're
54,
very close.
Okay. In over the course of 3 years. So
5
a lot of
years.
us are going to 5 years. Sorry,
I've upped it. It started with 3 years, and then I went to 4, and now I think it's going to be 5.
So apparently, Francis will be spending the rest of his life in Africa.
Exactly. But anyway, yes, for most people who are going to be visiting Cameroon, they're just going to fly in. Like I said, it's the size of California, so it's a big country, and the infrastructure is not like California, and so it takes a little bit longer to move around the place. But you'll probably fly into Douala because that's the biggest city. It's the Manhattan of the country. It's not the capital, but it is the biggest city. In the same way, Nigeria, the biggest city, which is Lagos, is not the capital. So you're going to probably fly into Douala, which is unfortunate because Douala is one of the least attractive places in the entire country. But
and so I'm picturing an African city, a lot of sprawl, a lot of people.
A lot of sprawl, a lot of people, horrible traffic, fair amount of pollution. Not terrible because it's right on the sea, on the Atlantic Ocean. The thing that really hits you over the head hard is the weather. It's extremely hot and humid 24/7. and you really can't escape it. There are some places that have air conditioning, but even in Douala, they'll have power cuts. Now, if you're staying in a nicer hotel, they'll have a backup generator,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
so that you'll be okay. In general, Douala is, I think it's obvious. It's worth certainly spending a day or two there just to like get a sense of the city and judge it for yourself. And there are a variety of restaurants, so you can taste all sorts of different types of cuisine there. But I don't know. I don't think Rejoice, you lived in Douala for a little bit. You know it fairly well as well. Things that you think are worth seeing?
The pizza place we went to at Aqua.
Yeah.
I love that place.
Are there any particular sites that you would recommend that we see before we leave the city?
I would say the only thing I can think of, she likes pizza, by the way. For her, it's an exotic treat. But she's forgetting that we're talking to people who can eat pizza all the time.
Oh, I forgot that. I thought that in Africa.
Yeah. No. These are all American tourists who can have pizza.
Okay, pizza is for rich people in Africa. If you don't have money, you can't eat pizza.
Right. And that's, by the way, another tradition. Speaking of eating food, would you say that most people Rejoice throughout Cameroon eat with their hands?
Yeah.
So that's another thing you have to prepare yourself for. Again, if you're not going to a fancy restaurant, if you're just eating street food, which is cool and recommended, I do it all the time, just be prepared to eat with your hands. What they'll typically do, they'll have some water.
You eat with your hands.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's not uncommon in many parts of Africa. In fact, I think we mentioned in our episode that we did on southern Morocco that our driver was uncomfortable eating with us because he felt embarrassed that he eats with his hands, and we really didn't care. But that's the custom.
Yeah, and so they'll have a jug of water nearby, and so you sit down on the street corner, and then they'll pour the water on your hand, and sometimes they have soap, and then you just have at it. And in all cultures in the world that eat with their hands, as you know, you always have to eat with just your right hand and don't touch the food with your left. So
your left hand is for other bodily functions, let's just say.
Exactly. That's right. And that's another thing, by the way. When you go to Cameroon, do bring toilet paper with you because they will almost never have it ever. Unless it's a nice restaurant or a nice hotel or something like that. It's pretty hard to. It's not hard to find, but it's hard to find in the toilet. Yeah, even in homes. Yeah, even at homes, they usually don't have toilet paper. I would say the only thing that's maybe worthwhile is just go by the coastline. There's places that have fish. They sell fish right on the coast. You have a nice view. It's quiet. It gets away from the city a little bit, and you can overlook and sit on the second story or on the first story. And you can have fish that's just been caught there, and they fry it right for you. And it's pretty cheap. I mean, for less than $5, you can have a really, really full meal. That's probably the best thing to do when you're in Douala. But then quickly you want to go out and then probably head along the coast to Limbe, which is, so you can either go east or west. If you go west, you're going to be heading toward Limbe, which Rejoice and I actually went to together. It's a nice seaside town. And nearby Limbe, which makes it so interesting and fun, is that it actually has Mount Cameroon, which is that 4,000-meter mountain I mentioned briefly at the beginning of the show. That is a fantastic climb. So anybody who goes to Cameroon really should take advantage of having such a massive mountain that's right next to the sea. But it's not an easy hike. Usually they recommend about 3 days. So it's a two overnight. They have these campgrounds along the way. The first campground is actually quite relatively nice. And then after that, the second one which was burnt out. And so maybe by the time people get there, let's say in 2016 or whatever, they'll have fixed it up. But it was basically mostly obliterated by a fire. But just expect high winds and cold temperatures once you get to the top of it, which again is just a stark contrast to if you're in Limbe, you're sweating and you're hot. And so it's an incredible contrast to go from one to the other. And yet they're right next to each other. So that's one activity I would definitely recommend high on the list.
And one thing I'm realizing that we forgot to do, and this is my fault, and I realized it when I brought up a map of Cameroon so I could follow along with what you were saying, which I recommend people do if they're listening, not driving in the car, is we didn't put Cameroon on a map. We obviously put it in Africa, but if you picture Africa and West Africa that has that bulge that comes out so that a lot of the countries that have a coast face south, Cameroon is in that notch, but where the countries stop facing south and start facing to the west that are on the coast. And we forgot to mention that because I honestly didn't remember that. So
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah. And so it's like you say, it's right on the coastline, right at the notch where West Africa bulges out. That's right.
So between Nigeria to the west of it, Chad, Central African Republic, Equatorial Guyana, Gabon, Guinea. Sorry, I was in the wrong continent there for a second. Gabon and Congo. So excellent. Let's continue.
Yeah, no problem. And so then on the east side, if you head east along the coast on the direction to kind of south, actually, really, toward Gabon, you will run into Kribi, which is a beach community, and it's another nice thing. So one reason that you should go to Cameroon is to check out the beaches and enjoy yourself. Now, I'm not going to put these on the scale of, let's say, the Caribbean beaches or some other world-class beaches out there. The best thing they got going for them is that they're warm, they're relatively clean most of the time, and the water itself is quite warm. But as far as seeing turquoise water and that kind of stuff, you're not going to see that. You're looking at the Atlantic Ocean. And so that's it's nice, but I wouldn't go to Cameroon just for the beach scene.
Okay. That sounds like what you're saying is it's not why you would fly all the way there, but if you were there, it's not a bad place to do. Okay.
Yeah. And then from there, you might want to head to the southwest corner, not from Kribi, but let's say you're still in Limbe and you just climbed up Mount Cameroon. Then you would go to a little bit further north of that, where you're going to be entering the Anglophone place. And this is where Americans will be quite happy, and the British as well, and anybody else who speaks English, because all of a sudden there, the people on the street start speaking English. And usually they speak some French, but their French is much weaker than their English, and so they're happy to speak to you in English. And the headquarters of that place is called Bamenda. Bamenda is the biggest city in that region. And they're also, it's interesting because there I get a sense that people in Bamenda are really into education and studying, and they tend to be let's say they value intellect and more so than I saw other places in the rest of the country. So it's just a different culture in that sense, and I don't know why that is, but it just seemed like after spending almost a week in that region, I got that feeling. But it's just cool just because now you got these rolling hills. And nearby, by the way, is Death Mountain, which is actually the tallest mountain of Nigeria. I know it doesn't sound very appealing, Chris, and I know you're kind of a semi-hiker guy. but and
that's accurate. That's accurate. Yeah, Death Mountain isn't the kind of hike that usually attracts me. Yeah,
exactly. But Rejoice and I went up it. Rejoice, do you want to describe how it was going up Death Mountain?
Going out the mountain, it's a little bit difficult for me because it is one of the tallest mountain I have climbed.
It was about 2,700 meters, right? I think it was.
So
was that
over
7,000 feet or something like that? But actually, she's being modest because she made it to the top, and I had really struggled because I had malaria at the time, and I vomited twice on that mountain, feeling quite terrible. And so the Death Mountain started living up to its name. But what it is, it's right on the border with Nigeria, and it is the tallest mountain of Nigeria. So here's the benefit, is if you go there, you can check off two tallest mountains. You can be on the tallest mountain of Nigeria and the tallest mountain of Cameroon. I mean, they're not next to each other, but they're in that vicinity, if you will. And especially if you go to the Anglophone part, it's right there. And it's a lot safer than approaching the mountain from the Nigerian side because the activities of Boko Haram are not nearly as present on the Cameroon side.
We should get back to the malaria because we're recommending that people go to Africa, and I think a lot of people, when they think about going to Africa, are afraid, or sub-Saharan Africa right now, may be afraid because of terrorism, which we mentioned. But there are other things that could cause you ill there, and you happen to contract one of them.
Yeah, when I was in Ghana about, I guess that was 2 years ago or something like that. It was December, I think, 2013. That's when I got malaria the first time, but it was actually relatively benign. I got one of the benign strains that just felt like having the flu in America, and then you just took a couple of pills, and about 2 days later, it was pretty much gone. And so I felt actually I've had worse symptoms having the flu in America than having malaria in Ghana. But then Rejoice and I went to Douala, and long story, but she and I were waiting outside at 4:30 in the morning for a friend to wake up, and we were getting devoured by mosquitoes. Douala has them. And so, especially at 4:30 in the morning. And so we were getting eaten alive. And it was there that we didn't know it because it takes about 2 weeks for malaria to show itself up. And that's something to think about for those people who are going to be traveling to these regions. You might feel fine the whole time when you're there, come back to America, and all of a sudden get sick. And you might have malaria, and doctors may not be able to diagnose it or may not even think that your symptoms are malaria. So the easy way to protect yourself, you can take these prophylactics. You can take certain things, the anti-malarial pills, before you travel.
Well, then some of those, one of the disadvantages you have is that if I'm in Africa for 2 weeks, a lot of the ones that you can take, Malarone or Lariam or those, taking it for 2 weeks is not considered at all a problem, but they don't recommend you take them for 3, 4, or 5 years.
Exactly, right. And so that's my problem, is that I took them, my strategy was to take them only during the rainy season where mosquitoes are more prevalent. But as you saw in December, which was not the rainy season, it was the dry season in Ghana, I still got nailed. And so then at that point, I just said, screw it. And anyway, I was in Douala. We both got stung. And then the next day we flew to Nigeria, to Lagos, and we drove back. We took about a week or so, 10 days or so, to get back to Cameroon, driving across all of Nigeria, southern Nigeria. And then interestingly, right when we got to the border, both of us got hit hard with these symptoms of malaria, where you feel nauseous, you feel a bit weak, and you want to vomit. And it's funny because they wouldn't let me go across the border because of Ebola, and they thought that they had closed the border because of Ebola reasons. And I said, but I don't have Ebola. And I didn't want to, and luckily they didn't take my temperature because I had a huge fever at the time. I basically had almost all the Ebola symptoms. Like soon after, it took 7 hours of negotiation to get across that border. And thank God Rejoice was there, because Rejoice was able to negotiate and bribe the guard on the other side, on the Cameroon side, to get me through. But it was ironic because after I crossed the border, the very next day I was vomiting. I felt like crap. I had basically all the Ebola symptoms that you can imagine. But and the funny thing is, and here's the crazy thing, Chris, is I actually got myself tested, and I asked them. I said, I think I have malaria, and they said, no, you're negative. And I went to a second doctor to try to get a second opinion, and he said, no, the test you took is 99.9% accurate, or whatever it was, and so you don't need to take it again. And I said, but I know how it is to get malaria, and I feel it. He says, no, you don't have it. Great. So that's when I went up Death Mountain, and that's when I felt really bad, because malaria is a very insidious disease. It's unlike anything Americans are experienced to, because most Americans, when you get sick, you kind of have the steady decline, then you hit rock bottom, and then you climb up. And that's how basically every disease that Americans are used to dealing with, how it works. But malaria is insidious and different. You have a roller coaster ride. You go down, and then you start feeling better, and so you think you're getting over whatever sickness you got hit with. And then you start feeling bad again, like maybe 6 hours later or maybe a day later, and then you climb back up again. And so, but each down gets progressively worse than the last down. We've been trained all our life to know that when things are getting better, you're all in the clear and you're on your way out of the sickness, and that doesn't work with malaria. So it's very challenging for us Americans to deal with.
Well, and the other difference being that you don't get better in quite the same way either.
Right. Yeah, it does stick around with you for life. And the other thing is that the interesting thing is the doctors then said, so I said, okay, so Rejoice and I both tested negative for malaria. So then what do we do? And they said, well, you should take the malaria medicine. I was like, what? You just told me I don't have malaria, so why do you want me and Rejoice to take the anti-malaria medicine? Because you never know. And so she went ahead, being the smart African that she is, she went ahead and took the medicine. I just said, I'm not going to take a drug that if I don't have the disease or the problem. So I didn't. So she got better, and that's when I was in Death Mountain feeling like I was about to die.
Well, I did want to cover that story. I am a little afraid that we just talked to people out of going to Africa, let alone Cameroon. So let's get into some of the other things you saw in Cameroon which make it worth the trip. Yeah.
Okay. So what I really like about Cameroon is most cities in Africa are really unattractive. They have no pretty monuments. They're poor design, hyper congested, polluted, trash on the streets. They're hot. They're criminal. Most big cities in Africa have those symptoms.
This spoken by the guy who keeps spending more and more time in Africa because he loves it.
Yes. But there are several exceptions throughout the continent, and one of them is the capital of Cameroon, which is called Yaoundé, and that's actually where Rejoice is talking to us right now. So, Rejoice, wouldn't you agree with me that Yaoundé is much better than Douala?
Yeah, Yaoundé is much better than Douala. I agree.
And what do you like better?
The cleanness and less traffic.
I assume that it's a much smaller city.
It's not as hot as Douala also.
Not as hot as
The
Douala.
reason is because it's sitting at around, I think, is it 1,000 meters or 700 meters? Something like that. So around 3,000 feet elevation. And so as a result, the temperature cools off a bit at night. And that makes it just more refreshing of a city and not nearly as oppressive as Douala can be with its nonstop heat. And you're right, it is a smaller city. Douala, I can't remember if it's 2 or 3 million people. And Yaoundé, I think, has only about 1 million or so. I could be wrong about these statistics, but basically it definitely is smaller and just a cleaner, more attractive. And the other thing is the actual monuments. I mean, they have several buildings. A lot of them are government buildings, but they're nice. They're well designed. They're pretty to look at, and they have museums. It's just a more pleasant city to hang out with. So that's something that everybody should go to.
And are there particular monuments or museums that you want to recommend before you move off that topic?
I think the National Museum is pretty cool. And in general, I mean, again, you have to, one thing I always have to recalibrate people, whether you're using Africa standards or European standards. I mean, no museum in Africa, except for perhaps the ones in Cairo or something like that, can't compete against the British Museum or the Louvre. So for Africa, the museums are interesting and nice, but just don't walk in there expecting to see like the Smithsonian or whatever. It's not going to be that level of quality. The train system is also cool. I mean, one of the things that's stuck over from the colonial days is the French did lay out some train tracks, and the Cameroonians have done a pretty good job at maintaining them, and their trains are actually in a decent shape. They have 2 classes. They have a second class and first class. And the first class is air conditioned, and it's actually worth it because you're not just going to get air conditioning, but you're also they're going to give you a crappy sandwich too. So it's a little bit of food. But it's true.
Well,
and they'll
how
give you
can we
glass of
turn
wine.
that down?
Finally, as you continue going north, you're going to head into the territory that I don't really know that much about, which is Marwa. But before I guess we talk about that, we can also briefly mention that you can make, if you're really adventurous, make excursions like Rejoice and I did. We went into the Central African Republic, the CAR. And Rejoice, you found new appreciation? So let me give you a little quick background, is that Rejoice, people in Cameroon like to complain about the president of Cameroon, who's been there for 35 years, Rejoice, right? Yeah, so he's been
32.
there for 32 years, whatever. And his name is Paul Biya, and
Paul Biya.
Biya, whatever. That guy, he's been there forever. And people, of course, like to complain occasionally about him, right? And so, Rejoice, what happened when you went to the Central African Republic with me?
Oh, when I came back to Cameroon, I love Paul Biya. I'm glad that Paul Biya is our president.
Why is that?
Because Central African Republic is, I don't know how to describe it, but I would not want to be a Central African Republican.
Yeah,
it's not good there.
So it's poorly run, or the corruption is more noticeable, or both?
All the above, everything, all the nightmare visions that you have of Africa, everything that can go wrong, the horrible roads, the insecurity, corruption, the poverty, the lack of electricity, power outages, just everything.
Do you remember, even with our money, we can't find something to eat?
Right, that's right. There was sometimes we had difficulty at times just purchasing food. It was just, we were there for about a week or so?
4 days.
Oh, was it just 4 days? Okay. Anyway, and it was just, it was unpleasant. And so you come back to Cameroon, you're like, oh, God, take a breath, sigh of relief. And so all the difficulties that people whine about in Cameroon are actually benign compared to what their neighbors are suffering through.
And we talk about Cameroon versus some of the countries in the area. Obviously, we know some countries like Tanzania or South Africa are known for their wildlife, and Namibia for the desert, and Nigeria for oil and email scams, which may be unfair. What stands out in Cameroon? The most notable region of Cameroon, or the most notable thing that you should see in Cameroon, or...
I would say if you had to pick one thing, it would be Mount Cameroon. It's just an impressive mountain. It's a 4,000-meter monstrosity just standing out there, and it's within
volcanic, I assume.
Yeah, it used to be. Yeah. Now the thing is that, again, it goes back to what I said at the very beginning of this podcast, which is that Cameroon is a mini Africa, and so even though I would point to Mount Cameroon as their kind of crown jewel, there's many different regions, and what we still haven't explored yet is the extreme north. So I think, Rejoice, you should start talking a little bit about. But unfortunately, like most people, like my I was born and raised in San Francisco, and my brother didn't ride a cable car until he was 35 years old or something like that. And so we often have this tendency, and there's a lot of New Yorkers, Chris, who've never been to the Statue of Liberty or gone up the Empire State Building, and they're born and raised in New York, right? So much in the same way, Rejoice is guilty of not really knowing super well. She's never been to Waza National Park, right, Rejoice?
Yeah.
But you've heard of it.
Yeah, I've heard of it. It's right close to my house in Marwa, but I didn't go.
So this is like the Serengeti of Cameroon. They have a ton of wildlife in that region. I really want to go there, but at that time when I was there, Boko Haram was still active. They had kidnapped the wife of the prime minister or something like that on a motorcade. So it was a region that they heavily discouraged going into. But if somebody's listening to this podcast in 2016, and certainly beyond that, really go in and check the conditions of Cameroon. And I think at some point this Boko Haram BS can't last forever, and at some point they're going to conquer it. And when they do, the extreme north, which actually has most of the best tourist sites, that's where you can all of a sudden see this massive change in culture. The way that I've just seen mainly photographs from it. I've talked to Rejoice a lot about it. But that to me is the huge culture shock. And if you look at Lonely Planet Guide, for example, you know how they put little dots and say these are the most attractive points? So they put like a dot on Mount Cameroon, they put a dot on Kribi, a dot on Douala, maybe a dot on Yaoundé. And then they'll put like 5 dots all in the extreme north. In other words, basically the most exciting tourist stuff is all in the extreme north. So anybody who's listening to this podcast, I don't think... I mean, yes, you can go to Cameroon if you really have to or want to, or something on your bucket list or whatever like that. But people who are a little bit more flexible and not as urgent needing to go there right now, I would wait until the extreme north opens up and calms down. And that's when I would go, because it would be a shame to come to Cameroon and do what I did. I was there for 4 months and never got to see the extreme north. I feel bad about that. And I think that given everything I've read and studied about the country, that's where a lot of the jewels are to see.
Now, I don't know if it's possible for anything to surprise you in Africa anymore, but what surprised you about Cameroon?
I guess one thing that surprised me is the train system. That was quite... I'm so used to everything in Africa, especially infrastructure, especially in West and Central Africa, to be utterly decrepit and falling apart. And the train, I was riding second class. I didn't even ride first class. And I was very clean, electricity. And
where did you ride the train?
I rode it between Douala and Yaoundé, the capital, and that takes about, I think, 4 hours or so, the train ride. And if you're leaving from Douala, it leaves very early in the morning, I think something like 5, 6 in the morning, which is nice because if you're riding second class, they have the windows down, and so the temperature is not oppressively hot. On the way back, if you're going from Yaoundé back to Douala, then you definitely want to take the air conditioning because there's a bit hot. So that's what would surprise me. And by the way, that same train doesn't end in Yaoundé. It continues on to the north and ends in Ngaoundéré. Is that right, you Rejoice?
Ngaoundéré.
Which is in between Marwa, which where she is from, and Yaoundé. So it's basically in the between. It kind of stops there. And from Ngaoundéré, you have to take a bus, right, Rejoice? And how many hours more did they have to go to get to Marwa?
7.
7 hours from Ngaoundéré?
Yeah, to Marwa.
Wow, God. Like I said, it's size of California, but the infrastructure is slower. So if you ever look at that on a map, you'll see that it's not an incredible distance, but it's obviously...
Yeah, that's because all the roads are broken. There's no roads.
That's right.
Now, you mentioned the Africa in a miniature. So I've got savanna, I've got desert, I've got jungle, but I'm not sure that I have a clear picture yet of what is where.
obviously the coastal stuff is, I mean, the stuff, the beach and all that stuff is obviously in the south and the west part of the country along there.
Along the
You're going to
ocean.
have the rolling hills, that kind of stuff is going to be in the Anglophone part of the country. And you're going to have a little bit of that transition. And then the kind of jungly part is all in the south and the west, around Douala and that whole area there. That's where it's the kind of the hot, steamy kind of side of things. And as you go further north, it starts becoming drier and drier and drier until you get to practically, you can go all the way to Chad. And Rejoice doesn't live that far from Chad. I don't know, how many hours does it take you to get to Chad?
5 hours.
5 hours, yes. It's actually relatively close. You'll start getting into the Sahel, which is the southern part of the Sahara up there. And it gets extremely hot. Rejoice, how hot does it get in where your village is from?
It gets up to 40 degrees sometimes.
Yeah, 40 degrees.
It's really
40 degrees
very
Celsius.
hot.
So that's, you're
So
talking about, it's well over
104
100
or something
degrees.
like that,
It's kind of like hanging out in Death Valley during the summertime or even in the spring or fall. It's Death Valley in America. But it's a dry heat, but it's still oppressive.
like
and
an
again,
oven,
exactly, like a sauna. And so the challenge there. So again, I mean, if it's not obvious at the beginning of this podcast, Cameroon is not is not the first place most people are going to go to Africa. I'm not suggesting it should be. It's a place where people want to have a bit of adventure, a bit of grittiness, a bit of kind of like a taste of the side of Africa that's a bit more rough and rough around the edges. For the most part, Cameroon allows you to have a variety. It allows you to have safety almost everywhere, except for the extreme north today. And one day, I think the extreme north will become safe once again, and things will be good. Rejoice, you can go, though, travel to the extreme north, right? Because you're from there.
Yes, I can go because I'm black.
That's right. And all camouflage. And by the way, and how do people dress, the different codes of dress in the north versus the rest of the country, Rejoice?
They put the babang, got a big, I don't know how to call it in English, the big jalabia for the men, and the women.
So it's a robe.
Yeah, it's a robe. It's like what they call boubou in French, at least.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Boubou.
Jalaba, I think, is what they call it in Morocco. Yeah.
Right.
One continuous piece robe.
That's what the men wear. I mean, it's a very, very strong Muslim country. There, you'll hear. I mean, Muslim culture in the extreme north. You'll hear just like you heard in Morocco, the call to prayer and all that stuff. But they are more intense than Moroccans. Moroccans have that westernized edge to them, and you can feel it and see it.
Right.
But and even in the villages of Morocco, you don't get the sense that they're like nearly as intense. But when you go up to the extreme north, I can talk a little bit about the northern part of Cameroon because I've been to very nearby in Chad and in Niger, very close to just where those three countries meet there around Lake Chad. I was there, and so and the culture is similar in the Lake Chad zone, and there it's just a level of Islam that is much more intense. But that doesn't mean it's scary. 99% of the people on the street that you're going to meet are super friendly, super nice, and they're happy to see you even if you don't dress like them. But obviously, if you're a woman, you're going to want to cover yourself as much as possible, but not to the point where you have to wear a burqa.
Sometimes in the U.S., we've been known to treat Africa as if it were one country, just getting no idea of what the scale of this continent is. I love the map that shows the United States and all of Europe and China and such fitting inside of Africa with room to spare. What's one thing about Cameroon that makes it unique within Africa?
There's several things. There's the fact that it's one of the only countries one of the few countries, I can't think of anyone off the top of my head that has the Francophone and Anglophone officially segmented in their country, where they're both not only official languages, but you have sectors of the country. It's about 80% Francophone and 20% Anglophone, but that's a hard thing to find in any other African countries. Second thing is what we've been mentioned a few times already, which is the whole idea of Africa in a micro level. We don't want to think of Africa as a country, but if you wanted to think of Africa as a country, then think of Cameroon. Because Cameroon can summarize Africa in one country. And you have a lot of the different cultures mixing in many different languages. I don't know how many languages, Rejoice? You have at least 55 different ethnic groups, right?
Yeah, 55.
Something like that, yeah. And so you have an incredible amount of diversity. Rejoice is a Fulani, which it's a particular tribe that is very popular in West Africa. But then you have many different other tribes and cultures in there as well. So that's what I think sets Cameroon apart from others. They've got a geographic diversity, they've got an ethnic and cultural diversity, they've got a linguistic diversity and interest that is hard to find in one in relatively compact package. I mean, it's a big country.
Before we get to our last questions, anything else we should know before we book our ticket to Cameroon?
Just keep an eye on the news and just wait until the north opens up. That's the main advice I could give people.
One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Cameroon.
I don't know if it makes me laugh, but I mean, it is interesting that you can go to the top of a 13,000 meter mountain and be freezing. I mean, Rejoice, were you ever so cold as you were on the top of Mount Cameroon?
No. It was so cold.
Yeah, I mean, it was real. I mean, it wasn't below freezing, but the wind chill, because the wind was fierce at the top there. I mean, we had several layers on, but I was quite chilly there, and we couldn't stay at the summit for more than 10 minutes because we just had to get down because it was just too brutal. But you can go from that extreme and then get to the bottom of the mountain and just keep going down to the sea, and you're going to be sweating like crazy, and you can do that all in one day easily. So that's I think, I don't know if it will make you laugh, but it is only in Cameroon can you surf and then go on the top of this mountain, and you can also speak French and Spanish. French and English, and you can have this Muslim Christian culture and a taste of the Sahel and the Sahara all at once. I mean, to me, only in Cameroon can you have that level of diversity, and that's why I think it's a fascinating country.
And we've said this a couple times, but let's summarize this. What should we pack before we go to Cameroon?
Insect repellent.
I think we got that.
Sunscreen, because by the way, since everybody in Cameroon is black, sunscreen is actually hard to find.
I wouldn't have thought of that, but sure. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And that's true, by the way, most West and Central Africa. Just the white population is so minuscule that it's very, very, I've gone to fancy pharmaceutical places and pharmacies, and it's hard. So definitely bring enough sunscreen.
You're disadvantaged not to have the natural sunscreen.
That's right. That's right. So sunscreen is hard to find, and so bring that. And other than that,
well, we said toilet paper and
toilet paper.
Quite possibly your prophylactic for malaria. Let's bring that too. And then I want to add into that hand sanitizer if we're eating street food and things like that.
Brilliant.
Just not a bad idea we're going to be a little, the water that's being poured on our hands there may not be quite as clean as we were used to.
I also like a SteriPen. Do you know what that is?
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So SteriPens, for those who don't know, is just a UV pen that allows you to purify your water by holding it into a liter of water for about 90 seconds or so. And that's a nice thing because occasionally, you can always order bottled water. That's plentiful and easy to find. But the nice thing is if, let's say you're in your hotel room and you don't feel like going outside and getting bottled water and you ran out, you can just take the tap water and use the SteriPen and drink that.
I also had a water bottle, actually, that's reviewed on Amateur Traveler someplace that has basically built into the lid of the water bottle is a UV light. And so a very similar system. Yeah, and the other advantage of that is then you're not adding to the trash problem that you have in a lot of parts of Africa with the bottles from the bottled water.
Yep, that's right. And that's another thing that's hard to get used to. I think that, again, this is common throughout West Africa. It's very hard sometimes to find garbage cans and trash cans.
Sure.
And especially once you move away from a city, it's just the trash can is anywhere.
Finish this thought. You really know you're in Cameroon when
you're on the top of Mount Cameroon. That's the best way to know. Because you are taller. I mean, I can't emphasize how much higher it is than anything around it. You're near the equator and you're freezing your ass off. That's, you're in Cameroon.
And if you had to summarize Cameroon in just 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Mini Africa. Rejoice, can you think of one word to summarize Cameroon? Diversity? No. Diversity, mini Africa? Well, I guess that's a similar concept, but anyway, one more from Rejoice maybe?
I can't think of any.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll give you credit if you need 4 words next time you come. Francis, you have been working on the Unseen Africa project. Do you want to tell us a little more about what that is and where we can find it?
Yeah, so you can go to theunseenafrica.com or africa54.com. There are 54 countries in Africa, so africa54.com. And basically what it is, I'm creating like three projects in one. Number one, I'm writing a book. So just like I wrote The Hidden Europe, which was about Eastern Europe, I'm writing a book called The Unseen Africa, which will cover one chapter per country and cover basically a travelogue. The second thing I'm doing is a documentary. It'll be probably an hour and a half or 2 hour documentary. It'll feature length documentary that could theoretically be shown in a film festival. And the third thing is a television show. And that's going to be episodes that last for roughly an hour. And that's a work in progress, although you can actually order the first episode on my website and get it. It's only $3. And you can download it there as a download. And that's featuring Morocco. And by the way, speaking of Morocco, my favorite episode, Chris, that you've done so far is the one that you did on southern Morocco. So if your listeners haven't heard the one in southern Morocco that was done in July, I guess, or August of 2015, you should go back to the archives and pull it out.
And you're promoting, just so we're clear, there's an episode that you and I did on
the Western Sahara.
The Western Sahara or southern Morocco. We're not talking about that one. You're talking about the one that was more of the report from the latest amateur traveler trip, which was to southern Morocco.
Yeah, and I thought that was better than my podcast with you.
Well, so, different region for one thing. So
yeah, a different region. No, but the main thing is, it's what I really enjoyed is that you had multiple voices that kind of were in the show, and it took a lot of work. And I hope your listeners appreciate it, because I know how hard it is to edit these podcasts, and that show was edited heavily, and that ends up making it sound really cool.
Well, thanks very much. Well, thanks so much, Francis, for coming back on The Amateur Traveler, and Rejoice for coming on The Amateur Traveler for the first time, and for both of you for sharing your love for Cameroon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No news of the community this week, and therefore we're going to end the episode right here. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Pinterest, or Instagram as Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe.